Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dresden Files discussion for books 1 through 3. We'll kind of jump right into all the introductions. But if you're on my channel, I'm sure you know everybody that's here. My name is Joseph Carroll. I'm an author, Dresden mega fan. I write under the pen name J.R. Carroll. So we'll let everyone introduce themselves, and we'll start there with Chaz.
Hey there, I'm Chaz. My channel's Bookish Chaz. I do lots of book reviews and other book related content, and I, I'm 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 slowly becoming an absolutely massive Dresden fan. So can't wait to talk about this.
Hi there. Name's Nathan Evans. I'm mainly just a good friend of J.R. Carroll. I'll hop on here and talk about random pieces of pop culture, and I got him into Dresden. I'm just the same amount of mega fan as he is. I go by the little pen name Warlock. It's something that he kind of started saying it. Good Lord, 20 plus years ago.
Do you want to go around this way? Sure, I'll go next. Why not? I'm Sarah. Hi, my channel is Sarah Reads, and I have chatted with Joseph in comments and things. This is the first time that we have spoken face to face, so that's very exciting. And I'm happy to be here because I am also becoming a fast fan of the Dresden Files. Or I guess I've already been converted. I am now. I have been converted to a fan. I finished recently, and I really enjoyed it.
That's what I should have said. I should have said I've been converted.
There's no becoming to it, Sarah. You are a.
I have
He is
arrived.
over to the dark side.
I'm Philip Chase, and Joseph. I remember distinctly when I read More Than a Vampire, picking up on some very cool vibes of some wonderful inspirations, and one of them I think I mentioned in my review of More Than a Vampire was the Dresden Files. So it is so great to be here to discuss the series with you. I'm only 4 books into the series. I've read the first 4 books, so I am not yet an official Dresden fan, but I can feel the tug. I think that the series is about to get more and more epic. And I'm at a point where I feel like I'm on book 5 now, and I think I can't just separate these books as like little standalone, kind of things that I squeeze in between bigger reads. I think at this point, it's probably going to be, I'm going to not be able to put the series down for that long. I want to keep reading the books. So, but we shall see. We shall see.
Oh, you're in for such a treat, Philip.
Hello, I'm AP, and my channel's A Critical Dragon, and Philip Chase is my nemesis because he's evil and nefarious, and no one should listen to him. I started reading the Dresden Files, actually, I think, shortly after the second book was published, so I've been reading them as they've been published. They're one of my favorite, what on the internet has come to be called a palate cleanser, because obviously I like those big, chunky, very in-depth epic fantasy series that have these huge books and very weighty matters, and then I turn to a Dresden Files book because I can sit down and it is a highly entertaining read, and I've enjoyed almost all of the Dresden books quite a lot, so I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it was so funny because Sarah was on. I didn't even know that Alan was kind of doing the same video, but I'm glad that more and more people are starting to, on BookTube, are starting to discuss the Dresden Files. And unlike Jimmy, I mean, he may have like 70 times more followers than I do that likes to talk about all this. I'm about the team, and we so we brought the A team here. And I'd actually like to ask a question about, like, how did you guys, I know AP said he got in right after the second book, so like 2001. How did you hear about the Dresden Files, and, what were your kind of initial thoughts? We can start off with Chaz.
Oh, well, I wasn't sure if we were going in the same order or not. I read Stormfront pre-BookTube before even hearing about BookTube actually. So I forget who turned me on to the series, but I remember looking at it and I'm like, oh, it has everything I like, because I love the classic noir hard-boiled detective. I love wizards, obviously, and so I'm like, the best of both worlds, set in Chicago. So I thought that was pretty cool. So yeah, and he has a cool name. I mean, all four of his names are cool. So I'm like, hey, why not check this series out? So, but I forget who actually recommended the series to me. But yeah, good times.
See, for me, it's one of those funny things where the most unlikely sources got me into it. Growing up, I was a bit of a Sci-Fi Channel nut. I watched pretty much everything on there, and that includes the Dresden Files TV series, which is just absolutely terrible. But
Don't tell AP that.
There's a
Amidst
difference
all the
between
quality
something.
sci-fi productions.
There's a difference between something being bad TV and bad adaptation, and we can get into that discussion if you want.
Oh, absolutely, that'd be a fun one. But yeah, watching that, I was like, well, this is a really cool concept. Is there anything else on this? And I started looking up and was like, wait, this is a book series? And then I also lurk this little literary tropes site, TV tropes. So I put the Dresden Files in there and started reading up on it. And they have this little tab that's like crowning moments of awesome. And I start going through there and looking at all these things that this guy, in this book series has done. And I was like, good Lord, I have to read it now. And, just archive dumped the crap out of it.
Does that mean you were spoiled for big moments before you ever started the series?
Not all of them. I think I spoiled myself on like the first one or two. And then I was just like, yep, can't read anymore. I've got to read this. And those first two, we can talk about that in this little video here, but there were some really cool moments in those first two, but thankfully nothing compared to what came after.
Right. I read the first book, Stormfront, in 2005 or 6. At a time where I was probably a critical dragon. I was angry, angrier than I am now, and definitely more critical of everything that I read back then. And so I read this first Dresden book. My friend had recommended it to me because I was a big Buffy fan. And I read it and I thought, how could you even think that you know me to think that I would like this? Like, this is terrible. And I didn't read any more until I came to BookTube. And everybody was talking about how great the series was and how much it picked up. And it was, 15 years later. So I was hopefully a different person by that time. And I picked up the rest of the series and I really enjoyed it. The things that really bothered me when I was younger are things that I mostly laugh or kind of roll my eyes at a little bit now. And I just think, okay, well, that's part of this, but I can move on to the other parts of the series that I really like. And now I love them. I absolutely love them. It was probably book 7 where that happened for me. I was doing what Chaz said he had been doing and reading them like every couple of months. They were fine as a palate cleanser. Yeah. And then once book 7 hit, I was like, okay, I am in it now.
Yeah, you ran with that.
I did.
There are 2 points in the series so far that I know of that are just those mega hooks for people. It's usually book 3, which I told Joe, or book 7. So if you've managed to power through all the books till 7 and you don't like it after 7, just put it down and go away.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Philip?
Yeah, I first heard about Dresden Files from a student in my fantasy novels class. And it was his favorite series of all time, and he spoke highly of it. And it was a very bright student, and I thought, wow, okay, I should check this out. And it was probably a year later or two when I started my channel here on YouTube, and I decided, well, let's try this urban fantasy series, because I mostly read epic fantasy. So was looking for a break from epic fantasy, something to squeeze in between. And it turned out to be pretty ideal for that. Although I've only read the first 4, so it's taken me, I mean, they're fast reads. I get through them really fast,
Yeah.
but I have taken my time reading in between these books a lot of other things. So I haven't made it a priority yet. But like I said before, I feel like I'm gonna reach that point where I'm gonna try to probably read 1 a month when I pick up 5, I think. So
the books are a lot of fun, and one of the reasons why I started reading them was there was a period of time, and maybe people have forgotten this, but there was a whole launch of a type of urban fantasy, which the alternate name for it that was played around with different bookstores was paranormal romance and dark fantasy. Dark fantasy being like a horror infused fantasy, but quite often had an urban setting. So things like Charlene Harris's Sookie Stackhouse, the Southern Vampire Mysteries, and Laurel K. Hamilton's series. These were big urban fantasy series, and then this was at the time like a sort of gender flip version of it. So you had, instead of the female protagonist and focusing on romance, you had the male protagonist and focusing a lot more on action. And then it was drawing in a lot of the detective noir aspects. And there are all these different ways of playing with urban fantasy, whether it's a relatively modern day setting, whether you're setting it in a Victorian time period or Edwardian, just playing with moving fantasy outside of that. Let's go walking through forests and then go to a mountain and then down into the dungeons of the mines to slay monsters. It was a different way of approaching the genre. So I was fascinated by a lot of these books that were doing something with fantasy that was unexpected for the preconceptions that I had as someone who was spending a lot of time reading epic fantasy, reading a lot of the big fantasy series that were playing with very well established fantasy tropes. And something like the Dresden Files, with that updated, quirky sense of humor, very much playing into the nerd aesthetic of the 90s and early aughts. The gamer feel to it. And, you know, I was a teenage boy once, and so a lot of that had resonance. There was a nostalgia to a lot of this, of remembering that adolescent power fantasy, that a first-person narration, that you're inhabiting this character who's going to get kicked in the teeth, but scrappily pull herself back up and defeat the bad guy. And it's all very, despite the refinements later on in the series, very clear-cut, good versus evil, very clear-cut who the hero is, very clear-cut that ultimately he is going to be successful, and it's beautiful women swoon and fall in love with him. He's going to defeat the monsters. A lot of that it ties into that psychological power fantasy. When you're feeling powerless, seeing it happen on page and imagining it can be very, very cathartic and enjoyable.
That was my issue. I had never been a teenage boy.
Well, people would argue that I was only a teenage boy for a very short period of time and then became a grumpy old man.
I was always a grumpy old man. That was the problem.
AP, you still have that youthful glint in your eyes. You can't fool us.
It's the Celtic blood in him that, it's that Celtic blood.
But Sarah, I'd actually, if Jared doesn't mind me sort of asking a question here.
Sure.
For it.
Did you struggle with that, not only the male gaze aspect to the writing, because there is an element, quite a strong element of that, but Harry's insistence of drawing attention to the fact and defending his position, because that is something, like, just rereading them for this, I was going, stop highlighting that this is a problem in the text and you're not backing down. And it was so aggressively in your face that I went, why didn't I have a problem with this when I was younger? Oh, I know why, because it never would have occurred to me.
Yes, it was definitely the second aspect. So it wasn't so much the male gaze. It was the, like you said, the highlighting of it. And then Harry's insistence that he is aware that people might not like it, but it comes from a good place because he's a good person. He's a chivalrous man. And
I was going to say that.
so now, like at this stage of my life, I'm like, oh, Harry, you just, I'll give you 15 more years, and then you'll look back on this and maybe think different things. But at the time, I was just furious. I was angry. I was like, what? Like, no, this is not okay. And I mean, clearly I was angry enough to not pick up another book for a decade and a half, but it's I'm much more forgiving of it now. But the male gaze is definitely present, but it doesn't bother me. And I don't think that was ever the issue. I think it was, like you said, that blatant acknowledgement that this is kind of a not nice way to behave, but you feel like it is coming from a place of goodwill, and people should recognize that.
Well, most of it would be from his own monologues, though, in his head too. So
Definitely.
I mean, this guy isn't outright going up to ladies and saying things he's thinking. So I would say that's by and large much worse.
Okay, hang on. In Stormfront, he meets up with Karen Murphy, and the first thing he does is races her to the door so he can open it for her.
Well, yeah, that's chauvinism, sure.
Because he knows it will annoy her.
Well, that's just him
That's what
trolling
friends
her.
do, right?
That's just him
yeah,
trolling
exactly.
her.
Yeah.
All right, so
yeah.
that's not chivalry. That's trolling. And now you go, well, he thinks it's chivalry. Well, actually, no, it's just trolling. It's being an asshole to someone. Right. And, we do this to our friends. Is Karen Murphy a friend of his in book one?
I mean,
they're
think
more
that-
colleagues than anything.
And he deliberately does something that he knows annoys her. So I know because we get his perspective, and the narrative is very much told from his perspective, what he thinks, we see what he sees and what he thinks is important to relay to us. He doesn't believe that he is acting in a way that if we saw this in real life, saw someone doing this, or someone did it to us, you'd go, do you know how frustrating that is? Do you know how annoying that is? Do you know how that is not socially acceptable? But when you're inside his head, we know his justification for it. We know he doesn't intend any malice by it. And this is the thing. This is the thing I think is important. Harry doesn't intend malice. He intends it to be a joke. But if you think about it from Karen's perspective, it's not funny.
Yeah.
It's only funny from Harry's perspective. It's not funny from hers.
This gets into what I think is a very important thing about this series, which is that Harry is a very flawed character, and that comes through most powerfully by the fact that it's a first-person narration. And it took me a little while to figure out, okay, I'm not sure how reliable Harry is as a narrator in terms of how he sees himself. And there are plenty of clues early in these 3 books to show that other characters don't see him the way he sees himself.
Nope.
So that's a fascinating facet of this. And I think all this male gaze stuff is very much tied to that as well.
Yeah, I would agree. With that.
I mean, I think one of the ways that he sees himself is just kind of this large, goofy nerd, whereas everybody else, when they're looking at him and everything, they see this odd, almost. I think at one point the term like autistic or just odd type guy, like creepy, says the weirdest stuff, never makes eye contact with anybody, for obvious reasons that he knows about, he understands, but it's not like he can tell them. And he just comes off as genuinely creepy and weird.
Yeah, he's very much, especially at the beginning, he's kind of like this outcast type person. It's except for the people who are like in the know. If you're not
Which
in
you can
that
count
group,
on one hand in the first few books.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's very, very interesting because I think as Butcher develops the series, and without going into any spoilers from any of the later books, I think not only does he become more self-aware of how the unconscious aspects of the male gaze affect the text, but also how grating that characteristic of Harry's can be for some readers. And when you gain a greater audience and you're getting more feedback from a more diverse audience set, I think that helped him temper Harry's character and attitude. And certainly in the later books, there is a significant softening of his aggressive chivalry, shall we say, to become much more considerate of the wishes of others. And it is blended into character evolution and development, so it doesn't feel forced.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
so
I
he
think
gets older and wiser, so it's not all just gray hair, guys.
Well, and you know, I guess you'd have to talk to Jim about it, but it could be, and it's probably a little bit of both. But the evolution, like AP was saying, the evolution of Jim Butcher's writing going into the later books versus Harry's somewhere around, he's in his early 20s at the beginning of these books.
About 25.
And yeah, for us who've been in our early 20s and it's a first person narration, you know, we were all
How much
we were all a
stupid
little
stuff did you
bit
say and
weird,
do?
you know, especially if you're into fantasy and stuff like that. You're probably a little weird in your mind.
And even though Jim Butcher's writing has evolved and he's grown as a writer, I have a suspicion that Jim Butcher intended early on for this to be a character that started out very flawed and grows over time. Because I mean, in some interviews I've said with him, he planned this to be a long series.
Oh yeah.
So he wanted Harry to start out being that kind of guy that's very cringy. I think that was intentional partly.
Yeah, from the time he was in college, as soon as he wrote the first book, he told his teacher, he's like, I had this 20-book series planned out.
She's like, oh, you sweet summer child.
I don't think that an author, when they're trying to write a published work, goes, you know what, this is going to be so successful, I will get the 20-book series. So I'm going to make my central point of view character of this first-person narration cringy, because that's what people want to read. I wouldn't think that was the plan. I think character evolution, character growth, character development are always part of, if you're going to have a long-running series. And picking urban fantasy with the initially episodic, this is the case. Like, these are the Dresden Files. These are the case files from the cabinet of the major events. Setting up that as an episodic serial makes perfect sense. And you go, I can run this for as long as there are mysteries. Think of the X-Files. Think of even Buffy with its monster of the week attitude, until you start getting into season arcs and then multiple continuations of threads and things that were established at one point. You go, let's pick back up on this. That model of detective fiction can run for book upon book upon book.
Yep.
And I don't think it was deliberate to make a lot of the early stuff cringy. I think part of our attitude to it is not only 20 years later, our values have changed. Yeah. We are 20 years older. We live in a society that is 20 years older. We are more aware of certain things. So a lot of what may have been at the time far more accepted in society is now shown in more sharp relief. And we find it cringier now, looking back on it, than we would have at the time it was written, regardless of our age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the first one came out in 2000, so
2000,
it's 22 years old now.
Yeah.
Old enough to vote.
Actually,
we
that's a
got
good
a lot
point.
of cultural drift.
That's a good point. Since you, AP, you said you started it, back in 2001?
Yeah, it was
it's book 2.
Back when book 2 came out in the UK. Whether that was at exactly the same time it came out in the US, I don't know. But
so
it's about 20 years ago. I'm trying to remember. I was reading them as they were coming out.
You're like, I can't remember what I ate yesterday. No,
so many moons ago, man.
But like, how do you kind of remember how you felt about it the first time versus your reread?
When I read it the first time, it was very much an enjoyable, plot-driven. Not no. There's a difference between something being character-driven and plot-driven, and character-centric and plot-centric.
Yeah.
They're not the same, but it is a plot-driven detective noir with a supernatural element that had funny jokes in it. It had a lot of those geeky references, the pop culture references. It was playing with very well established tropes. It flowed along at a relatively breakneck pace with enough breaks in the narrative to allow you those moments of respite. All in all, it was a very mechanically well constructed novel, and it was enjoyable. It was easy to read, and I went, this was a fun diversion for an afternoon. And so that's why I went, well, I'll get the next one when it comes out. And it was just because I'd seen it because of the second one. I went, oh, I got the second one. And then that was it. That was anytime a new one came out, I bought it and have always enjoyed them. But, you always have that one eye on, well, maybe it's only me, but I always have that one eye on structural aspects, on the mechanics of how it's been put together, on all of those things, which the vast majority of readers don't care about. But
that's definitely you, AP. It's definitely you.
Well, I guess that brings us to Stormfront. Now, I've reread through the series a handful of times, but only in this last year or two, I haven't. There was a time where there was a couple years in a row where I was doing rereads every year of it. But the last couple years I haven't. I've just been trying to get new series under my belt and, read different things. And I had, we'd always, in the fandom, you always talked about or Stormfront, it's, the worst or second worst book in the series. But coming back to it recently, I think I read it 3 weeks ago. The writing is really good. I mean, I feel like, Jim Butcher's writing style was fairly good coming right out of his first novel, having, read all these other fantasy books. So what was your initial, thoughts on Stormfront once you got into it? The story and writing and all that good stuff.
Who are we starting with?
Yeah, AP, if you want to, I feel like you're ready to go. So.
Well, no, I talk too much. I talk over people. I don't mean to, but I do. So I think it's only fair that I shut up for a while and let other people in the chat have a chance to talk.
Well,
how about Nathan? Why don't you go first?
All right. So when it came to Stormfront, it's a kind of flash in the pan sort of book. I think, what is it, 8 hours maybe?
On audio, it's 300
yes,
pages.
Yeah, right. I'm sorry. I tend to do audiobooks when it comes to these. Marsters is awesome in them, so I'll look at it how long he can read it. But that one was a flash in the pan, really fast, even in an audiobook format. A straightforward plot, sort of, he kind of hopped right out of the gate, established the bare bones. You don't learn about, the White Council that they keep talking about in this book until 3 books later. So there's plenty of stuff going on where you're like, okay, well, that could be a myth arc. That could be something going on. I mean, how many of these things are breadcrumbs and how many of these are just him filling in text? So, it's enough to get your mind going if you have an imagination, a decent imagination going. And, you'll fill in a lot of blanks. And for the most part, I mean, it is a very straightforward plot, he starts out with somebody showing up at his doorstep randomly. Like, hey, I need help for doing X, Y, and Z. And he starts digging into that. And, it splinters off to him looking. It's 2 different things he's got going on. He's got the cop side and that private detective side of things. And then, of course, because of the plot, they both converge and everything. So no wasted word, as they say. You don't want to waste any words or any time in any of these books. And this, for the most part, it's a straightforward, solid book. He gives you your magic fix.
So, Sarah, what was your initial thoughts on Stormfront?
When I reread it this time, I thought it was fine. I still wasn't convinced when I picked it up that I would fall in love with Dresden, which I'm really happy to have been wrong about that. I think that the mystery is definitely not the strongest of the series, but it does do a good job of hinting. Like, is it Nathan?
Yeah, you can.
Sorry,
say
because
that
I'm
or
just
Warlock or
Warlock,
anything.
and it's
You can call him the Warlock too. He'll answer.
Yeah, it's fine. I'll answer to that.
like Nathan said, it does a good job of sprinkling in some details that make you intrigued about what is going to happen next. And I do enjoy first person narratives because I like getting to know characters. It's my favorite thing about reading. And so having that lens into Harry's thoughts is nice, if not somewhat grating in the first book. So I enjoyed it more when I read it the second time, but it is still probably my least favorite of the Dresden Files. If I had to pick one that I would put at the bottom, even though I think a lot of those first ones are, as AP said, like they're fun. You get to see that urban element of fantasy. They are quick to go through. They do not, for me, live up to the rest of the series, but I enjoyed it well enough. Which would not be, this is why I didn't review the first one, because that would not be a resounding, like, go ahead and read the series review.
So, what do you think, Philip?
Yeah, I thought the pacing was excellent for what I was looking for, a fast page turner. So it worked really well for that. I'd like to give kudos to Butcher for the dialogue. I think he does a great job with dialogue and conveying a character's personality through dialogue. He's very skilled at that. You get a sense of the characters through that. And the first person narration, I think, is something that it bears study. It's interesting to me what gets revealed and what doesn't, and that sort of thing. And like I said before, I think that you have to look at Harry as an unreliable narrator, and that could have some interesting repercussions down the road. So I liked it a lot. One thing that when we get to AP, maybe last, is I would, if he doesn't mind, I would love for him to explain the 3-part plot structure to the books, if he doesn't mind, because it's something that he's talked about before, which I think is really cool and
that would be cool.
It's something that he's pointed out that I didn't see actually after reading. I think AP, you wrote that comment on my second. I think it was on Full Moon. I hadn't noticed it at that point, but as soon as he pointed out, I was like, "Oh my God, yeah, he's right." So maybe when we get to AP, he can talk about that.
Nice.
So, what do you think of Stormfront, Chess?
Well, I was instantly hooked. I've mentioned before that I'm a huge fan of the noir style detective stories. I grew up watching stuff like I think I've watched The Maltese Falcon like probably 20 or 30 times. It's one of my, I always liked those style of movies, James Cagney, all the old classic detective movies and stuff. And so I was instantly drawn to this when I saw the type of story it was. And then heck, he's named for 3 super popular pop culture magicians. I'm like, okay, I can get into this. And so yeah, I was instantly hooked. I actually really liked Stormfront. Like with other people, it's not my favorite of the series, but I thought it was a solid first book in a series. And I did notice the character flaws, right? The male gaze and stuff like that. But I tend, even though it's annoying, I tend to be forgiving of flaws because everybody's flawed in one way or another. And I just kept thinking to myself, well, maybe he'll grow out of that, and he does. He grows and matures. So I kind of gave him the benefit of the doubt with that. So yeah, I loved it. I thought it was great. The big bad for the book was quite well done, And so, yeah, it was great.
Just before AP talks, I'm going to just say, sorry. The thing I think that makes me frustrated about Harry and his behavior early on is we keep calling it a character flaw. And I really think that he believes it's a character. Like, I think that he believes that this is a good part of him. Like, I think that he believes this is one of the good things about him. I'm such a gentleman. Like, people don't understand because they don't get me, but I'm such a gentleman. And that's awesome. You're not.
Right.
Well, all right. So I think this kind of falls down to perspectives and such. Like, we're first person. He's in these earlier books. He's in his early 20s, and like he's grown up and lived around people that are in the, centuries old. So maybe he picked up on it from people that was doing this back when it was accepted. And
I don't dislike Harry. I like Harry. I think that he has a lot of redeeming qualities.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I just don't think this is one of those.
From a modern perspective, I will agree.
He's very oblivious to other people's perceptions early on in the series. He's very very self-centered in that way.
A typical 20-year-old.
Yeah.
Well, it's like you look at pictures of yourself from 15 years ago, and you're like, I thought that was good looking,
right?
Yeah. There's a massive difference between Harry having the character flaw of thinking that he's being chivalrous and having these old-fashioned values, and the male gaze within the text. These, while they are linked, they are not the same. Mm-hmm. In book 1, in Stormfront that we're talking about, how is Karen described? Oh, we all can picture her exactly. Oh, she's a cute little... How many times does he describe Karen as cute? Multiple times, even in the midst of action. Go into the second book, in the midst of devastating action and people being ripped apart. Oh, look, cute little Karen Murphy is... Right. That isn't chivalry. That isn't a character flaw. That is a male gaze perception that is imbued unconsciously into the narrative. And if you think this is overstating it, so Karen is cute and attractive, and she's a wee 5'5", and God love her, and she's tough as nails, but look at those baby blue eyes and her blonde hair, and she's wonderful. And then you have Susan, seductive, sexy Latina Susan. Okay, so one of the other major characters who Harry crops up in both books, Harry is known for years as a good friend, so good, in fact, he borrows his truck, Mac and Ollie. Please, someone here describe the physical features of Mac.
He's bald, tall, very unassuming.
But we can describe Susan's nipples. We can describe her eyes. We can describe her lips. We can describe her hair. We can describe Karen's hair, her eyes, the shape of her mouth, what her body type is, what she generally wears, how she stands, how she feels. In fact, she's quite attractive for someone who is in this position, and she's a scrappy wee thing. Oh, dear God. That this is when we talk about the male gaze, people assume we're talking about the character flaws. Oh, Harry just notices these things. Harry gives very detailed descriptions of lots of characters, including Johnny Morcone, because how many times do we hear about the old faded green dollar bill color of
dollar
his
bill
eyes?
Yeah.
And the fact that he looks like an athletic coach. Do we hear anything about, whether or not his groin is protruding, that he has a big package? Do we hear about what his pecs look like and whether you can see his nipples through his shirt?
Well, that's not what Harry cares about. He's a typical straight guy.
I was going to say that.
He's meant to be a detective. He's meant to be giving us an accurate representation of people. And this is the difference. In exposition, where the exposition is in the text, here's Karen Murphy. I'm going to describe to my reader, because remember, the first book has very much you. It is actually directed to the reader. It's a direct conversation, which shifts over the course of the series. But he is describing Karen to you, and he thinks one of the most important things to describe about Karen are her breasts. One of the most important things about Susan are her breasts. Mac, it's a vague man.
Well,
you don't need as a reader to picture Mac and Ollie behind the bar. You get more description of the bar than you do him. With Johnny Morcone, we get more description of the color of his eyes. That's the thing it keeps going back to, rather than his physical shape. Oh, he's like an athletic coach.
Yeah, well, in his in Jim's defense there, and Hare's defense, he does almost always tell you about how broad-shouldered and bulky, and the guy's fists, he could kill me. Like, he always kind of like, it seems like every character, at least at the beginning, like every character could, you know, Harry thinks, oh, this guy could probably take me out. Or like, oh, don't let his giant man hands get on me.
Every male character is described in traditional masculine framing of physicality and power. Every female character is described in traditional feminine framing of how attractive they are. And then, as an aside, and also they're intelligent and scrappy.
This is actually, it goes right back to the source material. I mean, this is detective noir. And in detective noir, you have a similar dynamic where you have a lot of description of female bodies from a very male perspective. And that is something that Butcher is intentionally, I think, replicating here.
Yeah, I think so too.
I don't think it is as intentional as we forgive. Yes.
Right.
But remember, this is only 20 years ago. If you're going to take detective noir, and yes, you're going to have a male detective, and you're going to appeal to the intended audience, adolescent, young adult male, that you play into that. Butcher is doing some of that. But this is the aspect of that male gaze. When people talk about it, that's what it is. It's not Harry's going, oh, well, I find women attractive. In which case, why does he describe, and through the books, very young women in that way?
Right.
Every female character is described like that. And that's even for a heterosexual male, for someone who is single and on the lookout for someone. In book 2, he's taken up with Susan. Book 3, he's with Susan. And yet he is still describing a lot of things about female breasts. That is a fixation. And the fact that a lot of readers don't pick up on it, they don't notice that female characters are always described in that mode. And it's not that I am saying Butcher should never have done that, but it's that mode is the thing that is grating. And the fact that Harry then goes, oh, but I'm chivalrous, that's a character aspect of Harry that is annoying and grating, but it's separate to how in the exposition, although it is filtered from a first-person perspective, it is highly sexualized when talking about women and focusing on those aspects. And even for a detective who is meant to be measuring threat, none of the male characters are as vividly or as accurately or as painted in such detail as the female characters who are in love with Harry. And even minor female characters, we hear about their breasts and hips. Minor female, this woman, talking about Charity, Michael's wife in the 3rd book, without revealing anything, but look at the description of Charity, and you go, oh, well, she was pregnant. But he still manages to describe her focusing on that, rather than giving you an accurate depiction of what she physically looks like. And it is a big difference. And that is what we talk about in terms of the male gaze. Not that, oh, he would just notice women more. You can notice people and describe them as attractive without detailing their breasts and nipples. He could have described their eyes and focused on that. He could have described the way that she brushes her hair always caught his attention. There you go. There's a little tick, a physical tick that can be included that shows the character's interest in that other character. That's what they notice. But it's not, oh, and her breasts did something to me. Oh, and I caught my breath because something I could feel stirring. You're like, oh, God, this is adolescent. Adolescent power.
He is described like that, though, being basically a large adolescent boy.
Yeah.
I think even past
27,
these
who's gone through abuse, lives on his own, has studied all of this stuff, and he still acts like a 14-year-old boy.
Oh,
Yeah.
actually, there's some interesting psychology to that too, though. Like how much do you think Arrested Development did he go through when he did what he did to Demorne?
Yeah.
So,
Very
but
true.
remember,
Yeah.
he has this whole thing, his whole commitment thing, that he doesn't want to commit to a woman because of love and the complicated nature of that. So he describes every single female character in terms of their sex and
Anyone that's not anyone that's not a wizard would be more or less tantamount to a puppy, or a dog. Not to say that they're like
No,
dogs,
he's
but
25.
like age
He's in
wise.
his mid-20s.
Yeah, but he can live into his, he can live for centuries, whereas the average human that's not a wizard is going to die, somewhere
But
around
he's in
80
his.
or
He
so.
hasn't gotten to that
I know.
stage yet.
Yeah, he's
So-
not there yet or anything. But yeah, if you knew you were going to grow that, be that you had the capacity to grow that old.
Well, that. Let's say if I said you're going to grow to be 80 years old. So when you're 25, why don't you hook up with a 40-year-old? And you go, but that's not how the brain works. You might meet a very attractive 40-year-old, go, oh, this is great. But you don't go, just because I'm going to live to a certain age, oh, I'm now going to think about these other people this way. That's obviously not how he thinks about Karen in book 1 or Susan in book 2 and 3. That's not how he approaches his relationships. It's how they ultimately end up over time when you live that long and ordinary people just die off, fade away. That's what a wizard is cursed to. But he is still a young man. But he is meant to be a man, not a boy. To go with probably a pop song from
but a grown man can definitely have younger tendencies depending on where he's at in his maturity stage. And I'm not excusing his behavior, by the way, at all. I'm not. But it definitely does paint a picture into the humanity of Harry Dresden that, whether we like it or not, it definitely shows his humanity. And that's why I called it a flaw earlier, even though it's something that he's been around and he's adopted it from other people, obviously, kind of maybe the culture that he grew up in, like Nathan said there, but
the culture he grew up in
was
he wasn't incultured. But that's what you find out. He didn't grow up in a culture because he was with his dad, who was a perfectly normal guy, and then wasn't. And in that period, it doesn't talk about him going out socializing.
Yeah,
it talks.
I don't mind agreeing to disagree. It's I'm not excusing it at all. It bothers me too, but I think I look at it as a very human. As a very human thing, and it still happens today. I mean, guys are still like this today, whether or not it's more looked down upon. There's a lot of guys that I'm like, hey man, her eyes are up there. It happens.
Yeah. But if an author is choosing to create a character, and that's the thing, you can go, oh well, I've envisaged this character as this. You go, so you as an author, but butchers look at this going, as an author, I'm going to create a character this way, and I'm going to make it really realistic. Even though that is actually gross and uncomfortable. It's going to include all these things. In my book 1 that I'm going to try to sell to a publisher and say, I want to have a long-running series of this, and it's going to appeal to a lot of people. That there are aspects of this. We can rationalize it, especially later on once we have grown very affectionate toward Harry's character. We look back and we excuse and rationalize because we care about the character arc, we care about the story world, we care about these things. The narratives are compelling. It is done consistently in line with a psychology of character, that it doesn't appear out of place. But the issue is, this was a deliberate choice made by an author to write the character that way and to represent it that way.
I'm glad that you brought that up. So I was going to ask, exactly how much do you guys think the sunken cost fallacy is kind of coming in on that? Where, Jim, when in the early books, wrote Harry this way and everything, but then thought, in for a penny, in for a pound, he's now got this character trait. I'm going to keep going and doing it.
This would be a really interesting conversation to have when we're talking spoilers for later in the books. And I think it would really tie into what AP is saying about Harry as a character and then the male gaze as a function of the narrative, because as the series continues, I think that Jim Butcher did get feedback on certain elements of the book, and certain things are tempered, but there are parts of, again, the exposition that come out that are not even part of Harry's psyche. They're not part of Harry's opinions. They're just phrases. They're just throwaway phrases, which I'm sure lots of people wouldn't care about or maybe even pick up on. But there are some points, even in the later books, where I had to stop and be like, I need to type this line out and send it to a friend who knows nothing about the Dresden Files and just say, what do you think about this? Because there's some that are just mind-blowing and totally removed me from whatever book it was that I was reading. And they're not about Harry noticing the physical attributes of any particular lady, and they're not really anything about his inner monologue at all. They're just lines that are used to describe what women like or why women are the way that they are. That make absolutely no sense to a woman. and I don't dislike the books or Harry or Jim Butcher for any of those things. It's just funny.
Yeah, it shows you elements of his archaic mindset, just kind of in general, toward women and the
Butchers or Dresden.
I think he means Harry.
Harry's, yeah, Harry's archaic mindset.
These are not necessarily about Harry. These are just things to describe the book. And I'm not going to comment on Jim Butcher's thoughts towards women either, because I don't know Jim Butcher. They're
exactly.
It's always interesting to read books by men about women or by women about men and what we feel we know about each other sometimes.
Well, and I know another thing that a lot of people, talk about the series is like the magic system and the way Jim describes the magic, in the Dresden Files. I guess, Chaz, like, what was your thoughts having read, a lot of fantasy on the magic within the Dresden Files?
I thought it was very unique in some aspects and similar to most fantasy in others. So like you've got elements of it that are very soft magic. It's your standard, I'm going to raise my staff and I'm going to send fire to this, I'm going to call down fire on this enemy that I'm attacking. And, very, very classic, it's not a very hard magic system at all. But then there's other elements, you'll see him down in his workshop putting together these different spells and constructing he's got his circle on the floor and things like that. And that's very detailed and intricate in the way some of that is described. So you can tell that even though the majority of what Harry does in his day-to-day that we see is more soft magic, you can definitely tell the intricacies of witchcraft that embeds everything that Harry does. And I could tell that Jim Butcher did his homework, because it felt like a lot of stuff that we not necessarily understand about the trope of witches, that they're always evil and bad, but just in general elements of witchcraft I thought were very detailed and felt real. So I love the magic system right off the bat. It felt unique and at the same time familiar.
Yeah. Sarah, I know like a lot of people have talked about like hard magic systems versus soft magic systems, and there's always been a debate. Like, where do you feel like the Dresden Files falls in line?
I think it's a soft magic system. I prefer soft magic, so maybe I'm more into. If I like magic, I tend to hope that it's a soft magic system, maybe. And Brandon Sanderson just kind of takes over your mind when you think of hard magic systems most of the time. To me, it feels very Dungeons and Dragons-esque. Like you have your potions, your spells, your cantrips. You have like the little funky things that Harry can come up with and then preserve for later, hold in his pocket for when he needs them. But then you also have those big explosions of power. But I enjoy that, and I don't think that soft magic doesn't have to mean ungoverned magic. There are definitely consequences for Harry's utilization of his magic. He has limits, and Jim Butcher imposes those in the narrative, and that definitely continues throughout the series, and you get to see some of those limits and understand them a little bit better as the books go on. But I like that it's not overly detailed or explained. That's what makes it feel magical to me. I know that some people like that more scientific element of magic. So it still has that sense of wonder, and I think that we can see Harry is often filled with wonder at the fact that he can do this. He appreciates that he is a wizard in a world that is mostly not. And he's really grateful most of the time to have that power. And he has worked to build it and has kind of like flexed those magic muscles, which is always nice to be, but it's I really like it. I enjoy that type of magic in general.
Yeah.
You know, it reminds me of another urban fantasy series with a protagonist named Harry. The magic system. I mean, it's kind of a hodgepodge of things, and they use. I think Harry uses. Somebody in the comments pointed out that he uses other languages, and Harry Potter, of course, it's Latin. You know, it wouldn't shock me if Harry said "Wingardium Leviosa" or something.
Well, he does kind of explain why he does that, though.
Oh yeah,
That's beyond the scope of this conversation.
Yeah, because I seen a comment that said like he doesn't explain the spells, but he does explain why he does what he does with the languages and everything, because he has to build basically a filter in his mind, because you're pulling magic from yourself instead of from a foci or whatever, and it can hurt you. And I love that aspect, because that shows you that it's not unlimited. He will run out, and he does. I mean, and that becomes like kind of a big thing, like from the comic books with like, how Spider-Man has his webbing, and his webbing always runs out at the worst possible times, and he has to find his way out.
Yeah, I enjoy the quirkiness of it, and that it seems to be kind of made up all as it goes along a little bit too. I enjoy that. It's fun. So I take the magic system as part of the fun.
Well, and I greatly enjoyed it. It's an example of soft magic as an approach that is done very, very well. Soft magic doesn't mean that you can't have limitations. Soft magic doesn't mean that you can't have rules. Soft magic is basically, there is a wonder and a nebulous nature to it. It makes it far more flexible as an approach than hard magic. And even when we talk about this, people talk about, is it a soft magic system? If you put the word system in it, you're already creating a construct in which the classification is going to have to function. And the magic of the Dresden Files isn't systematized, but there is a logic and coherency to it, but it's incredibly flexible. So Harry says a magic phrase or thinks a magic phrase and in order to focus what he is doing into an effect. That's
true, Chris.
If you look at David Eddings' Belgariad, the will and the word, it's exactly the same aspect. And we would describe that as incredibly nebulous and soft. But because Butcher adds in detail, it's, this isn't as soft. Like, this has clear, all of these different approaches have limits. They have things. But if you notice in the Dresden Files, those limits are very fuzzy. And quite often, conveniently, just this once he managed to, I've no power left, but I reached deep down inside myself and found power I didn't know was there, like a $5 note down the back of the sofa. Look. None of that is to say it is badly done. It is highly enjoyable. This is a romp. This is an adventure. It is a story of excitement. To boil it down into, it must be systematized, and it should follow these established rules. Harry's a wizard. We know he's going to use magic at some point to solve his problems. That's the entire focus of this. What is it going to be fun? Is it going to be entertaining? And the number of times that essentially he pulls something out that you just go, no one could have seen that coming, because of how all of this stuff had been discussed before. But even when we think of the making of the potion, something that seems, it has these different elements because you're balancing the different aspects of the five senses and then imbuing it with spirit as a sort of the pentagram idea of how to create a potion. That's great. So he had a bit of dawn's light in a handkerchief. He had a soft sigh, a baby's cry. What was he doing? Sneaking around a nursery with a bottle going, got his cry. And how even do you capture that? These are wonderful, abstract bits of color that if you started drilling down into does it seem believable? If you start thinking about it and scratching at the surface, you go, no. Harry's workshop is full of things that shouldn't be there. And not only that, he talks about how they go off. He talks about all of these things is it still fresh? Yeah. And yet he just so happened to have a bit of dawn sunshine that was folded up there. All of these things in all of these jars. How does he fill up an entire room? He must spend all morning going around collecting this stuff. in order to fill up the room for that day, and then go, oh, they're all past their expiry date the next day. Oh, magic changes in dawn and dusk, the witching hour and the false dawn. These moments when it changes the shape of magic and it breaks up the circles. And why doesn't that affect anything in his workshop? If you scratch at the surface of it, wanting it to be rational scientific, you are going to be sorely disappointed. There is enough there to suspend your disbelief willingly and just go, I want to enjoy the story. It is magic. It is unknowable. It is awesome. It is fun. And
that's one of the things that makes this such a great palate cleanser when you're reading so many other massive tomes and like intricate fantasy stories, and then you come to Dresden and you're like, here we are.
But the one thing that seems to be consistent in the magic is the exercising of will.
Yeah.
Right. That seems to be the key component to it, and that is why you get often these. I'm 4 books in, but I've seen it many times where Harry's out of gas, and suddenly he just has to conjure up the will to make the magic happen, and that's where it comes from. So that seems to be the one consistent thing. But yeah, and it's just fun. It's meant to be quirky and fun, and I think it is.
Exactly.
Yes, it works well with his personality. His bullheaded nature lends well to explosions of power that are fueled by will.
And he always tries to remind us that, you know, he's got more horsepower than most people, but he doesn't have the refinement, and that always seems to help him, but also fight him.
Except when he reminds us that he's very well trained and has all of this refinement that the other people don't have.
Yeah. He's like, there's level, he's always like, there's levels to this game. He's like, the Shadow Man, he was like, oh, I figured out that you actually suck as a wizard, and I'm better than you.
And, then he like pulls at some thread or something and completely dissipates his
and he's like, oh, I was able to beat that spell? Oh, he's nothing.
How are you doing that? Well, I was educated, you uncultured swine.
I have finesse and control of these things, apart from when I don't, because it's all about I don't have finesse.
Now, if I had to take off some handcuffs, I'd crush your hands.
And, this is a weird thing. One of the tiny little quirks of the Dresden Files that bugs me. So Harry's dad was a stage magician. And it talks about how he went to all these shows. His dad teaches him little tricks. He never learned to pick locks in the early days. And he's named after Harry Houdini. And he talks about this. He's all trussed up. He's like, oh, if only I was like Harry Houdini and my dad who taught me these things and showed me these tricks and I could have practiced.
Yeah, I think he says something to that effect at some point, like, I wish my dad would have taught me lock picking or something. I think he says something like that.
I think so too, yeah. I seem to remember that.
And that's the thing, is I always look at this and go, that would be the thing. If that was included, you'd go, that is actually really good. Yeah, that was the magic his dad taught him. And it sort of is a nice mundane counterpart to the mystical aspect. And that is is a very personal pet peeve. That I would have loved that as an aspect of it. That was the legacy of his dad, as opposed to the other part of his parentage that we're not going into.
Yeah, as we go on to once you finished Stormfront and then you went into Full Moon, how did things change in your perspective of the Dresden Files, and how did you view Full Moon versus Stormfront? We can start with Sarah.
I liked Full Moon a little more than Stormfront, but I like werewolves. If we're talking about supernatural creatures, I like wolves, so I like werewolves too. I think a lot of people don't enjoy that there are so many different kinds of werewolves in Full Moon. There's so much to keep track of. I kind of like that. I thought that was a fun spin. I enjoy
thought it was too.
Yeah, I like it when Jim Butcher brings in those elements of folklore into his books, and it definitely happens more often with the Fae and the creatures that they bring along with them. But I do like it when he expands on that element of the series. Again, these first books are not my favorite. I had committed to going up to book 7 because that's where people had said, this is going to be where it makes or breaks for you. And I enjoyed it. I thought that it was fun. like the things that bothered me about book 1 continued to bother me in book 2. The things that I enjoyed about the series in book 1, I continued to enjoy in book 2. I think I liked book 2 a little bit more because I liked the werewolf aspect of things. But I do know, and this is just the first 3, so my impression of Karen Murphy initially in the series was not. I found her interactions with Harry very frustrating. I think it was just a product of the writing more than anything else. And I did not like their dynamic early. And I knew that she was going to be important. I like that was the part that was frustrating, is clearly she was being set up as a character who is going to be important throughout the series. And we don't know if that is in a romantic capacity or as a friend or as a rival or what it's going to be. But I did not like it when they were talking to each other early on in the series.
Because she's trying to arrest him every other second, it seems like.
Yeah, there was a bit of antagonism going on.
And I think we get sorry.
Antagonism? Oh, we've worked together for years. You keep helping us out as a consultant, which Harry says they've been doing this for a number of years. That's the majority of it. Oh, this one thing has gone wrong. Harry, you won't tell me this one thing. I'm just arresting you. You're like, he has told you stuff about magic. He's told you that there are things that he is not allowed to discuss. Well, no, he must tell me. I need this information. So you're allowed to tell me all the confidential police information that you have. Well, of course not. I couldn't do that. That's breaking the rules.
It's very frustrating.
And this happens multiple times. Susan does exactly the same thing as well. Why won't you tell? Why can't I just do this? You're like, and he's like, oh, well, I can't tell you this. But she investigates this stuff. Okay, so you can't tell her that thing. Fine. But she is so adamant, but I have a right to be there. You're like, no, you don't. And it's the intransigence of the characters, despite everything that they see, despite the fact that he is reassuring them and saying, so that, thankfully, that is an aspect that really does start to fade a lot as the series goes on.
And do you think, AP, that's because after these first 3 or 4 novels, the women are allowed to have more than one defining personality characteristic? Is that why it improves?
And I think, like so many authors, there are very few authors in this world who, after their first book, their writing gets worse. Almost every single author in the world, their writing improves. Their grasp of how to refine and communicate the complexity of character that they had in their head, who may have begun as a plot function, but now has become more rounded and is more of a person. And that gets reflected. And the long series with recurring characters is the perfect opportunity to do this. Because when you look at individual books, is there much of a character arc in terms of development for Harry or Karen or Susan in book 1? No. Very little changes from the beginning of the book to the end of the book. But when you look between book 1 and much later on in the series with various characters who appear, you go, oh, lots of character development. Butcher's really good at character development. You go, well, it is 13 books have passed. You would expect characters to change, but he does reflect it in change that is consistent with a trajectory that we can imagine for the character. And for those characters who appear repeatedly, we get to know them. Butcher lets us in and refines and deepens that character and gives them, as Sarah points out, more than one personality trait, more than one string to their bow, something for them to do, something that they are not just being defined by their relationship to Harry, and the plot, they are being defined by who they are. And they exist outside of what Harry needed in the plot at that time.
And I know, so far we're saying in the first 3 books, I even going on further, I think some of the darkest scenes, in the series happened, especially the jail scene with the Loop Guru, still one of the most disturbing images painted throughout the series.
That is a really good scene. I really like that part.
Same.
Well,
Terminator.
Even at the very beginning of the book, I mean, right off the bat with Full Moon, I mean, you get that quite gruesome scene. I mean, he just walks in and there's been this massive bloodbath, and before he even puts together the pieces to figure out, okay, there's a werewolf on the loose. I mean, such a huge step up from the Stormfront right there, and that's Full Moon just felt larger than
Yeah.
Stormfront did. Lot more characters in play. You've got the mob on the scene now, that they're playing a part, so it just feels larger. But yeah, it had some pretty gruesome scenes. I think some of the most gruesome that we've seen in the series, like you were mentioning, JR. Yeah.
Well, I thought an interesting thing about Full Moon that didn't really happen in Stormfront. Stormfront is very much Chicago. It's very much, and even then, it's not a detailed Chicago. It's Harry's apartment, the police station, and the house out by the lake. Like that's essentially all you need for Stormfront. But Full Moon suddenly was bringing in, the FBI, and they're from out of town. So out of town does exist. We're going to refer to the fact that Europe exists, and and suddenly it sets it in a bigger world, and you realize the story world is not just the environs of Chicago, even though that's where the action's happening. There are now references to the bigger world outside it, and with the reference to, say, the White Council being dropped in book one, you can see it starts to develop into, well, no, now I have to think of this outside of this would just be North American. I have to think of it in terms of an international organization. That elements of it start giving the indication that Jim Butcher during this series is going to explore something bigger than a Freak of the Week episode in Chicago, that it has the potential to go further. But if someone had said in Stormfront, he has all of these things thought out, I would never have believed them. And I don't think Jim Butcher at that stage would have believed that he had all of this thought out. The Never wasn't fully thought out in book one. But the concept was there, and what he could build on, the idea of having building blocks in place that you go, I drop these things in, that gives me an idea. Now I can develop that further. And that's what we begin to see in Full Moon, that it's not, it goes not just mages, but some of these creatures exist. And if those creatures exist, other creatures exist. And you have your knock-on effect, which gives us that impression of a much deeper world that is actually reflected in the text. It's, you can call it iceberg storytelling, where you show people the top bit of the iceberg and imply this giant iceberg that's underneath the water that the reader can't actually see because it's not in the text, but it's implied.
Yeah, that, and in my own writing, I mean, that's the biggest thing I've taken from the Dresden Files is, like, you can throw things in, like you said, AP, and they're going to assume since that's there, then this is there, and then their mind just starts racing about what all could be in this world.
Hey guys, I'll be right back.
So Nathan, how did you feel your first read through Full Moon, transitioning over from Stormfront?
So before I started the Dresden Files, I was really big in horror-esque books. So I'd read all kinds of these much darker horror-themed books, and that, delving into it, it started out, well, like you guys said, kind of in a more gruesome place than the last book. But even that, I was still kind of looking at it like, this is just another urban fantasy, Dresden Files book here. But, as it continued to progress and everything, there was definitely that horror aspect that cropped up more and more throughout it. And I ate it up. I loved it. I loved everything about it. I thought it was leaps and bounds better than Stormfront, and I didn't hate Stormfront. So, I mean, I was just getting more of a good thing. So, I just thoroughly enjoyed it. I loved, like AP said, I loved the, iceberg storytelling, the, the implications of a greater world. I loved, the different types of werewolves, like Sarah was saying. I ate up the fact that there were like 4 different flavors in that. You were like, okay, well, that's kind of cool. So now, like, Oh, and this is something you notice as the series continues to progress, but like you look at it and you hear, oh well, there's 4 kinds of werewolves. All myths are true. So like every different culture's werewolf is a legit thing, and it has this different little fiefdom in Butcher's world.
Were-goats.
Were-goats, were-bears, were-everything.
Yeah, we haven't even,
We
and
be
that's the
wearing
thing,
it
we haven't
all.
even touched on Bob yet. I mean,
Oh,
and
right.
that's just,
Oh yeah, Bob. I was wondering when we were going to talk about Bob.
Oh
I
god,
love
everything that everyone complains about Harry when it comes to the male gaze and all that, all that stuff, it's up to 11.5
Oh
with
yeah,
Bob.
Bob is so much worse.
When I was doing the chat with Alan, I said that Bob is essentially like if you put Master Roshi from Dragon Ball Z into a skull, like it's the same. He's that like
Amen.
perverted old man in every anime who's just there. Like that's his function. That's why he. Except Bob also happens to have this kind of repository of knowledge, which is good. Harry can take things from him when needed, but that is like he is essentially old anime man. That is his character.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I mean, his function is basically Harry can't use the internet.
Yeah, he's the magical computer.
Jim has to give him a way to get certain kind of information and stuff, rather than running around for hours.
He trolled his writing teacher too. Like Bob was kind of he was the genesis of I'm going to troll my teacher because she said, all right, when you're writing a story and everything, if you're going to be dropping exposition and everything, just don't make someone a talking head. And so he's like, challenge accepted.
Right.
Yeah. Bob is an exposition machine. That is Bob's plot function, and it's in classic science fiction. It's where you have someone go, but I don't understand how this works. Well, Bob. And they are known as well Bob conversations. And, Butcher takes that and goes, yeah, I'm going to have fun with it. I'm going to exaggerate it. I'm going to throw it in there. And it is actually a perfect illustration. People talk about, oh, I don't like that trope. It's not the trope. It's how the trope is being used. And the well Bob conversation is an incredibly well-worn stereotypical trope. It is a cliche. It is routinely deployed badly. And here we have Jim Butcher taking this absolutely terrible trope that everyone says you should never use and goes, no, I know how to make it work. I know how to make it funny. I know how to draw focus on it and go, no, I'm not hiding this. I'm not disguising it. Look, he is an exposition machine. He is literally going to do plot function of, I will tell you the thing you need to know. And it's as blatant as that, but it is the relationship between them, the characterization put into it. As much as we despise his fixation on very young girls, but it's just weird. Don't get that conversation started. But apart from that, it's highly entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Bob's just, he's a demon, doesn't operate by social norms and stuff, and even Harry has to call him on the carpet a few times, which is ironic.
Well, us humans, we have this weird fascination with morality.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, quick question. If he's an alien creature, doesn't understand humans, doesn't understand human culture, doesn't understand morality the way that we do, or human interaction and how we evolved, why is he both male and heterosexual?
That's because he imprinted on Harry when Harry first found him.
But Justin had him before.
Yeah, he belonged to Justin, but
and it's a long line of them. And he is a creature of spirit of intellect. He is a spirit of wind. But when we look at it, Butcher could have given Bob any character trait to make funny.
Yeah,
could have had Bob interact with the world whatever way that he wanted, but he chose the character that we get. And it goes back to what I'm saying. It's not just about Harry's perspective. There are underlying aspects of the narrative universe that can be unconscious and can be conscious. And it's fine to have them. It's even fine to like them. But Bob is alien.
Yeah.
but he has that personality, and we just accept it. Look at the number of the vampires described through the series that are, they're all, even though they're vampires, they are heteronormative. A lot of the fairy are heteronormative. There's a heteronormative baseline to all of these different things. You go, so that is part and parcel of the story world.
Yeah, you're not wrong about that for sure. It is very heteronormative. Although I'm only in book 7, so I don't know if it changes over time. But
I don't think that part changes all that much, even out to the most recent ones. Now, the conversation about Bob and his personality, though, I think the conversation's a little hamstrung with the limit of our ability to talk about which books, because it expands a lot on that in the later ones. Now,
it does.
Once we, if we keep doing these, I'd love to redress that conversation when we get to it.
But okay, he gets paid in trashy romance novels.
Yes.
That's really funny, but because he's a sex-obsessed teenager who reads romance novels. What? There are certain aspects that, yes, in later books, whether or not they are retcons, they are developments in a certain direction or an attempt to explain certain things. But the initial construction of Bob, which I would maintain, didn't contain all of that stuff that happens later on, because otherwise it would have been framed differently in the beginning. It changes over time, and when you get to a certain point, you look back and you rationalize things, you forgive things, you recontextualize things and go, right, I will map that on and now it's fine. But when you're reading through, as Butcher was writing them, I think he becomes much more aware of these things and therefore starts to change those aspects in the writing to start building in frameworks to support them. And that's not a bad thing. That's an author paying attention to the changing world, to their fan base, to their expanding personality. That's a really good thing for an author to do. I don't think Butcher should be criticized for it. Yeah. But to sort of go, oh yes, but this is explained in a later book. You go, that's retrospective explanations are not always what we think. They're not always intended from the beginning.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's actually really cool that AP actually was reading these as they were coming out. This is a perspective that I, for one, I don't have, because I archive dumped, 1 through 12 in something like, a 3-month time span. And then, then I had to wait. But I was actually going to see, like, what do you guys think when it comes to this question? I'm not huge on the booktuber scene or whatnot there, but I keep hearing, especially from Joe here, the difference between a plotter and a pantser. Exactly what do you think Jim Butcher was reading the books, especially from the beginning as they keep freshly coming out? Do you think he's more of a plotter, or is he more writing by the seat of his pants?
I get the impression that he's a hybrid.
A bit of a hybrid?
Yeah. Because, I mean, there's elements of his books that are definitely structured, but at the same time, there are other elements that feel like he's kind of just writing off the cuff. So it may be where he has a loose outline, but he doesn't outline every single little thing. And that's where I would say he's probably more of a hybrid.
This is really hard to talk about when we're only talking about the
I know.
Most writers are hybrid. Most writers are somewhere in the middle. You're not usually an extreme one or the other.
Yeah.
So
unless you're Sanderson.
Yeah, it's like if you're Sanderson, you write a 200-page outline, so you write a book as your outline. Or if you're like Stephen King, where you're just like, I know the character, I'm just going to start throwing stuff in here and see what happens.
Here we go.
I had a nightmare, and then now I'm going to write a book overnight.
Yeah, but like what AP was saying is on my reread, I mean, maybe some people don't, but I like and respect like Marconi for what he is and what he does.
Marconi now, I like that.
But it's like weird. Like as I reread book 2, it's like, well, I respected him after book 2, and I didn't think that was the case. Having 17 books, but what he did in in book 2, and you're still building this tension between him and Harry, but also like he saves Harry and Harry saves him, and they have this kind of this mutual understanding of we don't like each other, but we'll do what we have to do when there's a greater threat.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I really like about Gentleman John Morcone is he is not necessarily a villain. And quite often when we talk about this stuff, we go, oh, there's the good guy and the bad guy, the hero and the villain, protagonist, antagonist. And one of the nice things about protagonist and antagonist, it's not pejorative in terms of their moral standing. It's to do with their function within the text. And Morcone very much comes across as an antagonist. That's who he is. He operates independently of Harry and Harry's story, which again is one of those things that I absolutely love. You never get the sense that that character is sitting in his mansion going, I'm waiting for the next Harry Dresden adventure to go and do something. We get a sense that this is some troublesome aspect that he's just been made aware of, and he now has to go and deal with it. But he has a life elsewhere. And I think all great writers give you that sense of characters, that they are not just waiting on the hero to drop by to go, oh, you've just come in. Thankfully, I'd only just finished writing this down in a series of notes for you. Isn't that lucky? Not contrived at all. Whereas think of the number of times you've seen in a TV show, they ring someone and that person's like, hello, oh yes, here's the information you need. No, has anyone ever rung you and gone, hi, I need this thing? You're like, who is this? Oh, hi, how are you doing? Right, but oh, how's the wife? You actually have a conversation, but narrative doesn't have time for that. Narrative jumps ahead, and then they go, oh, right, that's great, got the information, and then they hang up. And you go, if someone did that to me, I'd be ringing them back going, oh, not even saying goodbye. We get used to this narrative concision. And when authors find a way to make the story world feel lived in, that it is not just a construction solely for the central character to inhabit, that is when you get a brilliant immersive reality being evoked. But if anytime Harry needed something, it was just conveniently there, or I need to speak to you, well, it's a bad time, Harry. Oh yeah, but can you make it? Yeah, sure, I'll be there in 5 minutes. It's Chicago, you can't be anywhere in 5 minutes. Traffic sucks. And like that. Being aware of that, when Butcher puts things like that in, Morcone having his own life and this being an annoyance, and not treating it the same way that Harry does, not thinking about it the same way that Harry does. Yeah. Even Karen, for as much as we talked about Karen Murphy earlier, but she comes at things from a different perspective, not Harry's. And that I really, really like.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right, AP, that these characters obviously have other things going on. Like, Morcone's a businessman. He's got other strings that he's manipulating and tugging on, and Harry just becomes an annoyance. Forgive me for this, but every time I read Morcone or however you pronounce it, every time I read his character, I'm instantly reminded. I don't know if any of you have watched the TV series Gotham, but I am always reminded of Don Falcone from that particular series, because the actor that portrayed him and his character in the show feels exactly like who Johnny Morcone is. Obviously, Johnny Morcone is much younger than Don Falcone was in that series, but he feels like that, very much your gentleman mobster, very well respected and feared, and so yeah, you get that sense that he's so much bigger than just Harry's world.
The Romanticized Gangster. And I think the similarity in the name might give away maybe where Butcher got some of the inspiration for it.
I wondered about that, yeah.
But the romanticized mafia don, like since The Godfather and various other iterations, even The Sopranos, we've seen this, I'm just a businessman, have him killed. That, but we've romanticized that. That is
Taken
a
to the
figure of
mattresses.
American mythology. And so including that, again, it fits with detective noir. It fits with that whole ethos that was being developed of the underworld figure, and then the respectable veneer, but deep down inside, he's actually a cold-blooded street thug who's worked his way up. You know, his scene with using the knives and how good he is with knives.
Yeah.
Again, a knife is a very close-in, wicked sort of thing, as opposed to, and requires, you would think, some level of finesse, especially the way Marcone uses them. Whereas, you know, the thugs with their Uzis that just
yeah.
spray bullets. You can see even in the use of weapons, and this is something we see in fantasy a lot, the type of weapon being associated with the character
With
is meant to be in
personality,
some way revealing of who they are. So having knives that are close in, personal, vicious, wicked, rather than, it's not that he's always sitting there with a sniper rifle, but we see he's an expert shot. You know, so there's a lot goes on in Butcher's writing that I greatly enjoy.
Yeah, and as we transitioned over to Grave Peril, this is the book where even Jim says, like, where things start really picking up, and he starts, plotting out. I think this is where the heavy plotting for the future began, was in Grave Peril. And I think we kind of almost, he's starting, this is the very beginning of it, but he starts to kind of build an epic fantasy around you. If you're, especially if on the reread, you're like, okay, I see what he's doing here. How did you guys feel once, you get the 2 books under your belt, and now, I think once you get to a 3rd book is when, people, and it's not a trilogy. They know it's going to go on further. People start expecting more, from you. So, Chaz, what was your thoughts once you got into Grave Peril?
Oh man, the world just expanded even more with this book, especially because now you're starting to see the Fey realm, the Never bleed more into the real world, in a very real way. And so I really like that about Grave Peril. And you're getting a lot more characters introduced too. We've got Michael, who is one of my
treasure.
The national treasure. He really is. He's an amazing character, and his wife is as well. The crap that she puts up with, man alive. And she has every reason to hate Harry. But yeah, so you're introduced to these other characters. We get to see so much more of Lananshi, I think is how she pronounces it. You get to see so much more of Harry's relationships with his Fae family, and I just thought that was really cool to see. So that is actually my favorite of the first 3 books. Actually, Grave Peril is, yeah, and the ghost story that's interwoven as well was just like that whole scene in the nursery was just creepy. I mean, I'm like, okay, yeah, this you don't want to read this in the dark.
What was that ghost name? Agatha, I think.
Agatha Haggathorn.
Haggathorn, yes.
Yeah.
So how did you feel about it once you got into it, Sarah?
I really like Grave Peril. I thought that it was a step up from the first 2 books for sure, at least for me. I don't typically like Fae, and I was worried about this going into Dresden. They're not my favorite fantasy creature to read about, and usually I tend not to like the way that they're depicted, but I really like the Fae in the Dresden Files, and that escalates as the series goes on. There are definitely Fae characters that have come to become some of my favorites, but I think that in terms of the way that the story unfolds, the extra world building that we're given, and obviously some of the things that happened to Harry in Grave Peril were things that I knew I would want to see the repercussions of further in the series. Like, he does things that are completely against his nature, against his own personal moral code, things that I knew were going to really upset him and change him as a person. And so that's when I really started to get excited about Dresden. I think I started to think differently about the series at book 7, because that's when I was like captured. That's when I needed to keep reading. But after book 3 was when I felt compelled by Harry as a character, and I was really interested to see where it was going to go for him, because I think Butcher makes some hard decisions. Now, he does kind of backpedal on some of them in Grave Peril. Like, there's some things that you think are going to happen that he does not follow through on, but he does make he executes some difficult decisions on Harry's part in Grave Peril. And I thought that for me, that's what made it a step up from the other 2 books in the series.
Now, Sarah, real quick, when you said most of the time you don't like Fae and everything, is it because of the Disneyfication of them, or what exactly don't you like about some depictions of Fae?
I don't know exactly. I haven't stopped to think about why I do or do not like them. I don't know if maybe they're often sexualized, maybe, but lots of things are. I don't love it's really hard, I think, sometimes to do I cannot lie, so I have to talk around things. If you're not skilled with dialogue, that can come I really clunky as well. But I think that Jim Butcher does a good job with that. And I for someone who started reading the series and has really fallen in love with it, I don't really like mysteries that much. I don't like things being shadowed, and that's not something that I enjoy having to piece through. I don't want to do it. And I think maybe those are some of the reasons that I don't typically enjoy the Fae, but I don't know. I would have to think on it more to have a better answer.
So, Philip, what was your initial thoughts once you transitioned into book 3?
Yeah, first thing, I think Chaz already talked about Michael Carpenter. The opening for me of book 3 was another level of writing where I felt like I immediately liked this character. It was a fantastic opening with the car scene when they're on their way to the hospital. It's just brilliant stuff. And a lot of it is the dialogue between Harry and Michael. It's great. And the personality contrast is fantastic. They're good foils for each other in so many ways, because Michael Carpenter just seems like such a perfect individual, whereas Harry, as we've been saying, is quite flawed and sees himself as very flawed, and probably next to Michael feels inadequate in some ways, and wants what Michael has. Michael has a stable family. He has a life that seems very together, in stark contrast to Harry. So I really like the dynamic that Butcher establishes between the two of them. It was interesting because I didn't talk about book 2 at all, but I actually liked Full Moon the least of the first 4 books, and unlike I think all of you, I think it's maybe because I didn't know that if this was going to be such a everything seems to have their camps. Like the vampires have their red court and their black court or white court, whatever. And the werewolves, I was like, all these different kinds of werewolves, and they're all these, in these gangs and everything else. And I was like, this is a little silly, isn't it? And I just, I enjoyed it and went with it. And then I realized, okay, there's a lot of this in this series. There's a lot of these camps and these courts and these councils and these various kinds of things that are and in opposition to each other. I can't say much more about that because we're only talking about the first 3 books, but that's something that I think is going to be a hallmark of the series. It looks that way at this point to me. So I liked it a little bit better in Grave Peril than in Full Moon, because I think Full Moon maybe prepared me for that sort of thing, where in Grave Peril it's the vampires, right? And I liked. I thought that Butcher did some interesting things with, of course, the relationship between Harry and Susan, and that gets, of course, at the end of Grave Peril, very problematic.
Oh wow, yeah,
it's complicated.
Very, a little complicated there. I overall like the book a lot. For me, the series did I think, rise to another level with book 4, actually. Not so much 1, 2, and 3, but book 4, Summer Night, is where I started thinking, okay, I think I can jump on board this train.
Well,
but-
I have a controversial opinion.
Oh boy.
No,
No, not me.
You never have.
Not me having a controversial opinion. Obviously, with Philip being my nemesis, he's clearly wrong here because Full Moon, Grave Peril has to, for me, was the one I enjoyed least. And let me work through this. So Stormfront, very classic murder structure of this case is introduced. Harry is a detective. He gets a case. And then he's assigned another case. And it just so happens that the two of them are connected. And then each one has a limitation or a time period that it must be solved. The weakness, a lot of the weakness in Stormfront for me was by bringing in the White Council element of this has to be done by this date. You go, there already was a time period. There already was a pressure. You didn't need an additional one. And it felt like an additional part of the story that wasn't necessary. Then in Full Moon, I actually have to admit that I agree with Philip that there was a checklist of the type of werewolves that were being introduced.
Right.
And lo and behold, the book went through each of the different werewolves and then introduced one at the end, we find out, is not one of those ones. Because she isn't. The wolf who turns into a human rather than a human who turns into a wolf.
Wouldn't that be a were-woman or a were-human?
So, but that's not included on the initial list. But the thing was, it went through kind of in a checklist. And I think the biker gang lycanthropes, which was an interesting way to address berserkers from mythology and different approaches to that felt to me like, again, one additional element that didn't need to be there. And actually, because of trying to go through it, it felt forced.
Right.
My problem is Grave Peril was the one I enjoyed least because for me, it was, again, this same thing of contrivance upon contrivance of, yes, I'm going to establish this thing. So there was and this is the first time Butcher really plays around with temporal structure. So you have, they're on doing this and then it's, oh, but this relates back to something else. Let me give you a flashback. Oh, and this actually, how did the day start out? And you actually have him messing around with the difference between story and plot, which is fine, but it's a little uneven. And then you have, oh, this is the red court, and here's the black court, and here's the white court, and oh, this is coming in. Because of that, it felt like there was this demon and the sorcerer that summoned it, and then it's the ghost of the sorcerer, the ghost of the demon, and then, oh, we're going to bring in the fairy as well. It was overstuffed with, yes, these are all wonderful things to explore, but in terms of a cohesive pattern, because ultimately it's Harry gets kicked in the teeth, Harry fights back, Harry gets kicked in the teeth again, Harry fights back, Harry gets kicked in the teeth yet again. How is he ever going to get out of this? He fights back. Each time it was just an escalation of Harry not being able to do something. Every single I've had almost all my magic ripped away, but I just have enough to get through this bit. I've had this happen. I've poisoned myself. Like, it was escalation upon escalation to create the greatest sort of dramatic tension. And ultimately for me, it felt like because it had been escalated to such a point, I went, I know he's going to get out of this, and I don't care. You've artificially inflated it so that now I no longer have any stakes in it.
Sort of an escalation into absurdity.
Yes. And even the whole aspect of the vampire court and seeing it, and oh, their saliva is narcotic, and you look at the effect that has on Harry at the start of the book, and then later on it's, oh yeah, well, you were asleep for 10 hours and you slapped it off. It went from being something so powerful at the beginning to, but now we're dealing with these other things that are far more important, so let's just hand wave away that aspect. Oh, and each time it felt, that's why I didn't enjoy it. Well, no, that's not true. I enjoyed it, but not as much as I liked the streamlined detective story that Stormfront was. And I enjoyed the second one because, again, it was kind of following that of unraveling a story and seeing the case that he is on, how it's related to a different case, and they get linked. Here, it was all over the place, and even when you line it all up, it is not a neat construction of narrative. Because
Maybe
when
would this be a good time for you to explain that 3-part plot structure?
Typically, it's not strictly enforced. There are different ways of doing it, but you can generally see one major thread of what the main arc is. So when you finish a book and you look back on it, you can see it was all building to this event, and you look back. And then you realize, well, okay, so in Stormfront, he gets hired for a case. And before he can get going on that, he gets a second case. And ultimately, obviously, these are the same case. Oh, lucked out on that one. It's a good thing he wasn't on two completely different cases. That would have been really confusing. They're both the same. And then there's usually a third dimension added in, which with Stormfront, and it's underdeveloped in Stormfront, but it's the third eye and the White Council aspect gets added in as the third plot thread. So you have, he's been hired for the private case to find the missing husband. He's been brought in by Murphy to investigate the murder. And then there's the third eye thing going on in the background, which turns out is related to the murders, which is also related to the missing husband. And they all just get folded back into each other. And it's a very neat construct when authors can hide quite how obvious it is. And one of the great things about Butcher's writing is he gets so much better at disguising those elements and showing organic links between them rather than them feeling forced. And this, we see it in Full Moon. Oh, there's been this murder, we're going to investigate. Oh, the FBI is here. And immediately I'm going, you're looking at this murder, the FBI's been called in. It's clearly some sort of like werewolf or something, because that's the implication you're given very early on. It's heavily foreshadowed. And then you have the FBI agent getting annoyed at Murphy and going into a bestial rage. And almost about like within 3 or 4 pages of that, you get the description of lycanthropes. And so even if it sends you off on a slight red herring that she's a lycanthrope, you've just been given this list of all the different werewolves. So now, if you think back, you're going, well, what type of werewolf could they be? And then as you're going through, you almost have that checklist of, well, let's see how we get through these. But you had the murder investigation, then the second thing of the girl at the start saying, I need to know how to do this summoning circle thing. And again, that was just like in Stormfront, here's a case, here's something that he could have taken up. It's going to end up linked. And because of that very bare structure, no matter how many different elements get folded in, no matter how cool those sequences are, how action-packed, like the police station being ripped apart, like that was an action-packed sequence. But ultimately, you can see those structures very, very boldly in that. And you can see how it is sequenced and how it has been, and it's going to sound negative, but mechanically plotted. This is very much mechanically plotted. You can see the links. The third book, I think, is where it's, again, a couple of strands too many that don't seamlessly link up. That the inclusion of the Never Never fairy and the fairy godmother, that's one element. The Red Court vampire, I blame you for me killing my lover. Again, this is a very senior member of the Red Court who's been around for centuries and has had countless human lovers, but now she's going to enact this grand revenge plot to get Harry. And this is the one where it feels almost like the entire world starts revolving around him and his actions. And I love actions having repercussions. That's not the point. It's all of the actions in this seem to be, oh, well, Harry's here. They all have to do with Harry. And it becomes very, very contrived and centralized on Harry as the most important person in the world. The Red Court having a function like this, extending an official invitation to Harry, who has just had the sword of Damocles removed from his head, but we don't have a warden show up. We don't have any of the other White Council show up. None of them have sent emissaries. None of them have objected to Harry being the emissary for the White Council. That there are all of these elements of the plot of, or sorry, the politics of these organizations that Butcher delves into and gives us this richness of exploration later on. But right here, it is so rudimentary and fragmentary that the pieces don't neatly fit. And you can see how they've been tried to move around so that everything lines up. But the demon summoning by the sorcerer, the evil wizard, is the bit that we skip over. Then the young girl who disappears basically for half of the novel to suddenly reappear and then disappear and then reappear at the end when we find out what happened. You go, okay, there's that element. There's, oh, it turns out that the sorcerer died, and that's why the cops are all stum about it, and they're worried about the book that Harry needs to destroy once he's read it, except we'll forget about that. That doesn't matter anymore. These things just kind of disappear. And for someone who is so important in the first two books, why isn't Marcone invited to this? We know he has a strong presence in organized crime, and Bianca is meant to be this madam with an element of organized crime that Marcone is unhappy with. But he's not invited around, and he's missing from the narrative. So who gets invited? The White Court vampire, a dragon, Harry, and Harry's godmother. Like, there are four invited. Oh, and the Black Court vampire, but they were already there. So there are four invited guests for this banquet. And it doesn't reflect the complexity of the world that we see later on. That gets developed later. It's not there here. And that's why this Grave Peril, it had brilliant moments in it, fascinating moments in it, wonderful sequences. But it just didn't hold together as a cohesive narrative for me. And that I didn't enjoy it as much then.
Yeah, when I first started reading, Nathan was like, "You have to pay attention to the party." Like that's, and I think maybe what you're saying, AP, is with the party, it doesn't make as much sense as it should. But I think that might be because Jim was trying to like put all
lots of stuff in.
Yeah, he goes, because this is going to be something that's going to come throughout the entire series.
Right.
This is going to be a fulcrum, point. And when I tell people, like, if you just want to know what Harry Dresden's about and his personality and everything, it's like just read that section there where he shows up as a cheesy vampire at the ball. And he's just like, I'm trying to piss people. I'm trying to troll people.
Just starts mouthing off at a physical god, the dragon and everything, and that is classic quintessential Harry.
And again,
in a bottle.
But with that point, the Red Court have guaranteed Harry's safety. The Red Court have extended this, and the dragon physically and magically attacks him. Like, Harry is thrown down with the weight of this magic, and the Red Court do nothing, which is a breach of the rules as it was established early on in the book, because Harry has come under actual attack. Not what Mavra, the black vampire, does, where she raises magic, but she's not going to throw the first punch because that would be her breaking the rules. But the dragon actually attacks Harry, and the Red Court does nothing. And the Accords are broken at that point. They have failed in their duty.
Well, I don't know about the Accords, but at least the sacred hospitality that they offered.
Right.
But
well, sorry, when I was talking about I meant the rules of hospitality are guaranteed by the rules that are actually under the Accords, because that's been agreed. As we hear talking about the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law.
Yeah.
The rules of hospitality of someone coming in are not necessarily binding, but under the formal invitation to the representative of the White Council, that is governed by the Accords.
Yeah, I think in this book there were so many great creatures and characters that Jim put in here. Like, we got to meet Michael Carpenter, the Lanchi, and then we got to meet Thomas Wraith, and we get to figure out what White Court vampires are all about.
The sex vampires. Well, one flavor of it anyway.
And Thomas is one of my favorite characters. I mean, he's just
he's
just great. You know,
Yeah,
just
Thomas is
goofy
amazing.
I really like Thomas. I'm really sorry to interrupt, guys. I do have to go. I have a pool party that I need to escort my children to. So I apologize. This was really, really fun. Thank you so much
Good
for
to see you, Sarah.
pleasure.
Thank you. I'd love to do it again.
Yes, please. Thanks. See everybody.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
But I think I've probably come across as the most negative about this series out of anyone who's been talking about it. And yet I still say I enjoy reading these books. These are good books. They are fun to read. But if you want to start discussing them, then this is what happens. You start picking things out and moving them around to look at how they fit together. And it's one of the differences between what do you read for pleasure? And I think you can read the Dresden Files. Absolutely. They are a wonderful, entertaining, pleasurable read. But that is going to depend on what you find enjoyable. And if we want to start then going into how they're made up, how they're constructed, what the different things, we're moving out of whether or not you liked it and into the realm of, well, okay, let's analyze it. And I can be highly critical and mean about things that I love, because it's like a split in focus. You're doing one thing or you're doing another. I enjoy reading these, but I'm not going to put Jim Butcher's writing up against like the great works of literature that I've ever read.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I might enjoy reading the Dresden Files a lot more than some of the great works of literature that I've ever read.
Mm-hmm.
I greatly enjoy these books. I think they have a wonderful sense of humor woven through them. They have brilliant pop culture references that Butcher starts seeding more and more into the series as he goes. That some of the characters become incredibly well realized, and he does great things, like as Philip pointed out, by pairing Harry with Michael. That contrast of characters. It's the classic buddy cop, the straight-laced character versus the roguish character. It's that classic contrast, and Butcher pulls it off well because it is a neat contrast between them. And there are always going to be elements about this that I am going to complain about or be slightly critical of. But ultimately, it comes down to, did you enjoy reading them? And yeah, I enjoyed reading them. I just didn't enjoy Grave Peril as much as I enjoyed the first two, even though I think that is contrary to almost every other reader on the entire planet.
I love these kind of deep dives into them, though. So yeah, I think this is fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right. I mean, they're fun. They're entertaining. I've heard them compared to called popcorn fantasy, and it is. It's something you could sit down with a bag of popcorn and watch a movie, but you're reading it instead. And
yeah, that's the way I feel anytime I come back to it. It's almost like you're sitting down and listening to an old friend tell you about his worst week of like, I haven't seen you in a while. What happened? Well, this is what happened to me.
Wouldn't you like to? Yeah.
And I was going to ask, I know Chaz is on book 7, and then Philip, you're on book 4, right?
I'm on book 5 now.
Oh, you're on 5. And AP, have you went through the whole series?
Yeah, I mean, was it Battleground?
Battlegrounds was the last.
That's the last one.
Yeah,
Most recent one.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to have you guys maybe do it do one of these every 2 months, every 3 books, if you can fit another book or 2 in there, Philip. I know you said you were thinking about starting to get into it, but you got so many books that you're.
That's the thing about it.
They're pretty quick reads, though. So
Yeah,
and they become very, very addictive. At least to me, you get through 2 or 3 of them. Once it was 3 for me. It was like I have to get through the whole thing, but once you get into like AP said, you have the iceberg. And once the water starts to recede, you just you got to have more. And he definitely recedes the water, that's for sure.
And that's one of the great things about, as the series progresses, it becomes much more cohesive as a story world.
It
that
does.
you can almost see Butcher in real time refining concepts and ideas that he had. It's like, well, now I'm going to explore it. And it doesn't necessarily very neatly match up with the initial idea that you saw presented, but you now see it as a much more concrete idea, and Butcher commits to it. And that is great. It's the evolution of how a series develops over time. And for fans who want to see more of a world, like it's so wonderful getting an author who, so I love my world as much, and I'm going to do all of these different adventures and experiment with different things, and maybe have them go off in a different direction and do something unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
And the series works for that. And they're entertaining. They are fun. They get better and better written as the series goes on. Butcher's writing becomes more sophisticated as the series goes on. But you don't fool yourself into thinking, oh, this is a deep thematic investigation of the human condition. If that's what you're looking for, your expectations are going in the wrong direction for what you're going to get. It's not that elements of the human condition aren't present, but these books are not a deep thematic exploration of the human condition. But they are exciting. They are interesting. They are entertaining. They are funny. They are action-filled. And Butcher knows how to develop and deliver stories and narratives at a pace where there's a punch, and then you have time to recover, and then there's another action sequence. And you can feel that ebb and flow as he goes along. And I greatly enjoy that.
Yeah, I appreciate all of you guys and Sarah, stopping over to discuss my favorite series of all time. I've had fun discussing Malazan with Philip and stuff, but just getting into, and Philip pinged it right off the bat when he read More Than a Vampire. It's like Jim Butcher has been one of the biggest influences for me. And to go back through it after having a few years off of not reading any Dresden Files books, it's been great to see. And as AP says, you get better and better and better. And if as an author, if the biggest compliment I can get is, I know my writing is not up there with like Erickson, but if I can get people to be like, I love to read it and it's fun. I mean, that's what it's all about, is just to have people be like, I want to come back into the world because it's just fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it would be cool to do this again, most definitely. I'm reading just one book a month right now. I'm on pace probably to be 3/4 of the way through the series by the end of the year. So yeah, so if we did one of these every 2 months, that would probably be doable, I think.
Yeah. If everyone's welcome to come back. I mean, this was a great time, even and it's so fun to pick fun at things that you love. When some things are ridiculous, it's so fun to do that.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. You can look at these books and go, oh, this is bad, but it's done with such energy and such love, and it's clear that Jim Butcher has infused his writing with enjoyment. I think a lot of that comes through his writing, that this is something he enjoys telling us a story about, and because of that enjoyment, I think that is an element that some authors find very difficult to translate to their reader. But I think Butcher's sheer love and enjoyment of this world shines through a lot of the writing.
Yeah. Yep, it definitely does.
All right. Well, I don't want to I know me and Philip have been on for like about 4 hours now, but I just wanted to appreciate all you guys coming, and hopefully we can do it again, and we'll see you all later.
Yeah, thanks, JR. Thanks,
It was a
guys.
pleasure.
Good to see you.
Bye-bye, everybody.